Hey, good morning, y'all. Josh's Severe Weather. Happy Tuesday to you. This video is going to talk about some severe weather in the plains and parts of the Carolinas, but I am also going to spend quite a bit of time talking about what is going to be maybe a bigger story this month, and that is going to be the threat for flooding. As we all know here, severe weather can take lives, but flooding is often the hardest to try to figure out, and flooding can cause more death and destruction of property, believe it or not. So that is something I'm going to focus a lot of my video on and talk about the areas in the central parts of the US that are most likely going to be dealing with that here in the month of May. Excuse me. I appreciate y'all joining me this morning. If you could subscribe to this channel for the latest, I'm going to have daily videos for you just about every day, except this Thursday and then upcoming Sunday. But let me go ahead and share my screen with you and show you all what we are looking at here over the next week or so. A growing threat for flooding, and in particular, I am concerned about parts of central and south Texas, where I think some places could pick up over 20 inches of rain in the next 7 days. That is an extreme event. I know a lot of western and central Texas have not seen a lot of rain recently. In fact, drought conditions have built in over the high plains here. Unfortunately, for some of you, the drought is going to end in an evil way. Just not very nice to see this amount of rain, but certainly I'm concerned about that over parts of central and south Texas. We could also have some flooding across the upper Midwest, especially the Dakotas. Not just from the amount of rain that's going to fall, but from the snowpack that has continued to melt and jam the rivers with lots of water. And this will come from some severe weather. It'll also come from slow-moving storms over the next several days. If you notice in the east, we're not particularly wet over the next week. In fact, we're going to have a pretty decent stretch of weather in the northeast, but there will be some rain to talk about kind of arcing over our ridge of high pressure. And in the west, there will be some unsettled weather, wetter than average weather across the southwest, but nothing to the extreme of what we're seeing across the plains and portions of Texas. Here's a look at the satellite loop from the last 24 hours, and you guys can see why I'm concerned. We have had severe weather, of course, in parts of the plains and Ohio Valley. That is now spreading south and east through Tennessee and into the western Carolinas. It is not going to pack nearly as much punch as it did the last couple of days when it got over the central parts of the country. But down south, we've got just kind of a stagnant weather pattern here where moisture gets pulled up from the Gulf and from Mexico. And you can see kind of a big convective blob here on our last frame, not moving very quickly. And slow moving storms in a moist environment leads to that additional threat for flooding. We've had some heavy rain in some areas already, but unfortunately, it's not going to get any better anytime soon. The west will stay unsettled, and as will the upper plains and Dakotas and Wyoming and Montana, as we do have southwesterly flow coming out of our next trough here, and that is going to be slow to move here. Here's a look at the radar over the last couple of days here, and you guys can see where our storm complex has formed over the weekend and moved southeastward. For the most part, Indiana avoided most of the severe weather yesterday. We did see one report of a tornado. Then the next wave of storms came farther south and east through Kentucky into Tennessee, and that's already weakening as it hits the western Carolinas. Notice South Texas, though, we've got just copious amounts of rain falling and not moving very quickly here, and that is where I'm most concerned with as far as there being weather that can cause property damage and threaten lives here over the next several days. And my goal is just to get you guys prepared and let you know what is coming. We can only prevent so much from happening when you're dealing with the atmosphere, but certainly we can do our best to prepare. Here's why things are going to be so nasty in the southern and central parts of the United States. We've got a trough moving into California and a ridge building up and over it across much of central Canada and the upper Midwest. What's going to happen is this ridge is going to block the progress of this storm system. It's going to allow unsettled weather and severe weather to move on to the high plains. That is certainly nothing out of the ordinary for this time of the year. But notice behind it, we've got another trough building into the southwest at the end of this week. And that kind of gets stuck here. It doesn't move very quickly. What's happening is as this anomalously strong ridge builds into Alberta, which is also a bad thing, by the way. We've had wildfires in Alberta that have produced smoke all the way to New England this morning. A beautiful sunrise, but lots of ground burning up here in Alberta. But that ridge is actually going to strengthen, and the Northwest is going to see record heat by this weekend. At the same time, you've got this trough stuck underneath it with no place to go. And so we have a moist flow out of the Southwest going right into Texas, and all that moisture just gets trapped. There's no way of kicking it out anytime soon until we get this trough to build into the eastern United States here next week. But as this ridge stays in place over Western Canada and the Pacific Northwest, then everything stays stagnant and we just have a system that's stuck with nowhere to go, lots of moisture feeding northward, and that's going to produce quite a bit of precipitable water here over the next several days. This is the total atmospheric moisture column. We call it precipitable water. It's high, and you can see the plains see a lot of that water, but Texas certainly sees the most of it. Florida will see a buildup as well, but just a ton of water in place here and nowhere for it to really go until we get into the second part of next week around the 17th and 18th. So this looks very bad for a lot of you in Texas, unfortunately, maybe Louisiana as well. And it looks pretty nasty as well for the Dakotas. Here's our total rain forecast from the European right on through the end of next week. We see amounts that are going to be widespread over 6 inches and potentially 16 to maybe 20 inches of rain across this area. Parts of South Florida will be wet as well, but only a few inches. Parts of the upper Midwest will see a few inches as well. But really, this is a lot of rain. This could be an extreme rainfall event, at least a 1 in 500 year flash flood for some folks. Zooming in on the European, in the Dakotas, you see widespread 2 to 4 inches of rain, maybe some locally higher amounts. And that is going to cause flooding on these rivers, unfortunately, with all the snow that fell over the winter. The GFS shows a high amount as well. This looks a little bit drier back towards Minnesota, but pretty wet in the western Dakotas. The rain certainly is needed, so longer term, this may not be the worst thing in the world, but in the shorter term, flooding certainly is a concern of mine. Now in Texas, the European shows the heaviest rain over west central Texas, and in particular, South Texas, between Del Rio and San Antonio. It shows 3 to 6 inches from Houston to San Antonio, but some amounts of over 17 inches in places like Hondo and maybe near Del Rio and down to Laredo. Parts of the Rio Grande Valley and deep South Texas could see well over 3 inches as well. But this is a global model. When you get into the mesoscale, you can see things certainly could be higher. The GFS does have a lot of rain in this area, but it actually has more farther to the north and east around New Braunfels and areas just east of there, basically between Austin and Round Rock and College Station. But, you know, when you take a global model like this and you run it a few times, you are going to see differences with time. But nonetheless, that potential is there for amounts over 20 inches. It may not explicitly being shown here on any one run of the global models, but I have been in Texas. I did my basic training at Lackland one summer in 2002 where we got 3 feet of rain in just a couple of weeks. It was really nasty. Kind of a traumatic experience for a lot of us marching in formation and drenching rain at 4 or 5 in the morning every single day for 3 weeks. But this is exactly the setup that was produced then, only it's a little bit earlier in the summer. But we are going to see a lot of flooding. So I'm very concerned about central and south central Texas over the next several days. Right now, though, the threat for excessive rain is a little bit closer to the Houston area. We have a moderate risk of flash flooding today into tonight in all of southeast Texas. That is bounded by a slight risk all the way to near Austin and as far east as Lake Charles and as far north as Leesville, Louisiana. As we get to tomorrow, that threat for flooding continues in Houston, and then the slight risk expands northward all the way up to the Ozark Plateau and to the east of Tulsa. Day 3, that risk for severe weather is lower. It's marginal, but as we get to the weekend, you'll start to see over the Edwards Plateau, over west central Texas, Big Sky country, at least a slight risk for flooding, and then that grows. And when I think things start getting really bad will be towards the weekend. Day 5 is Saturday and Saturday night. If you have weekend plans in Texas, especially west and southwest of Dallas, and especially around San Antonio and the Edwards Plateau, we need to be very much mindful of this. It is a forecast. It's 5 days out. It could likely change, but this pattern is likely going to continue to grow, and we are going to see significant amounts of rain falling over the weekend and continuing into next week. So let's shift gears here and talk about severe weather. Yesterday was not as active, but we definitely had quite a bit of severe weather starting in Missouri and then spreading into Kentucky. Illinois and Indiana did kind of miss out on the worst of it, but what in the world's going on here? All right, we did have one tornado report across Indiana. All right, SPC's website went down on me. All right, here is the slight risk over the next couple of days. We actually have an area in the Carolinas to watch out for today, but we're primarily going to see severe weather over the central and high plains. Here is day 1. We see that threat for severe weather in Kansas mainly, And we also see an area in eastern North Carolina. Day 2 tomorrow, quieter across the east, marginal risk over the southern plains, and a slight risk all the way up into the Denver area, up to Casper, Wyoming, and into southeastern Montana. Day 3, a lot of those same areas will start to dry out and things shift eastward into the Missouri River Valley and as far south as just to the north of Oklahoma City, maybe about Stillwater on up through Wichita, and as far north as Pierce, South Dakota, as far east as close to the Des Moines area towards the evening hours. Zoomed in here, you can see North Carolina today. We are going to have to keep our eyes on things later in the afternoon for some big hail. Places like Greenville, Elizabeth City, Roanoke Rapids, all the way over to just north of Cape Hatteras. So Kitty Hawk will be in that slight risk area for hail. A bigger area of severe wind goes all the way back to near the Raleigh area, basically I-95 from just north of Lumberton, straight on up to Roanoke Rapids, even sneaking up into far southern Virginia, places like Emporia, and on eastward through Suffolk to the coastline. But we are most concerned about severe wind across down eastern parts of North Carolina. So Wilmington, New Bern, Morehead City, Aurora, Swansboro, those areas all the way over to Cape Hatteras in the evening hours today. No real risk for tornadoes at this point, mainly just a damaging wind and hail threat. Back into Kansas, we are going to see the risk for large hail growing and maybe some very big hail. Places like Dodge City and Hayes spreading eastward towards Manhattan and Emporia, Kansas. So Emporia, Virginia and Emporia, Kansas under the gun here today and tonight. We have a slight risk for tornadoes as well, all the way back into the panhandle of Nebraska, and a severe wind threat as well today and tonight. Tomorrow, that threat shifts westward into Colorado. It includes the greater Denver area. It includes the panhandle of Nebraska, eastern half of Wyoming, southeastern parts of Montana. There could be some hail as well, but Thursday we see a growing chance for larger hail. Places like Wichita, right on up I-35 towards Topeka, Manhattan, and just east of Concordia. We also see a risk for perhaps a tornado or two across this area. But big hail is going to be our main threat. Taking a look at the Northeast, things have quieted down mostly here. We're going to see a lot better weather over the next 24 hours. Some light rain will move through the mid-Atlantic region, but nothing severe expected here. That should move out around mid-afternoon, and then we're left with dry weather after that. I'm going to zip past you in the Northeast and move south into parts of the southern mid-Atlantic, into the Carolinas. And here's a look at storms that are moving into western North Carolina. They should weaken this morning, moving through the Roanoke area, but more storms likely are going to pop up north of Wytheville and east of Beckley. And these are going to spread across Virginia into a more favorable environment for stronger storms, especially after about 4 o'clock. We'll see individual cells that could produce hail and strong winds from about Statesville and, say, Waxhaw, North Carolina, up through Greensboro, and as far northeast as Roxborough and all the way over to about Henderson, North Carolina. These storms grow in intensity and in coverage as we get to about 5 o'clock. They may sneak into the PD area of South Carolina as well. But the areas of greatest concern are going to be northeastern North Carolina through about 5, 6 o'clock, and then southeastern parts of North Carolina around 7, 8 o'clock here. I'll zoom that forward for you guys. This is the HRRR, and probably our best chance for severe weather is going to be here east of 95 around 7, 8 o'clock tonight. It's all going to be pretty quick moving, not a ton of rain out of this. We could have briefly heavy rain and lots of lightning, but things quieting down already by about 11 o'clock, and then that's it. A couple days ago, the models showed more action across Virginia. Now they have kind of shifted things south. We do have to keep an eye on things, though, across the Richmond area and then moving down the peninsula and even the northern neck here around mid-afternoon. But overall, the HRRR is shifting things south into North Carolina. Speaking of the Carolinas here, taking a look at South Carolina, we are going to see pop-up storms again today like we saw yesterday. These could have a little bit more oomph to them north of Columbia toward about Great Falls into Chester County, and then spreading south and east towards the low country here around evening time. That includes Georgetown, Myrtle Beach, Pawleys Island, all the way down to Allendale here in South Carolina, but not a widespread area of severe weather. Georgia's going to miss out on most of this. And then we look at a much quieter day tomorrow as the humidity drops, temperatures cool a little bit, and then we see some buildup here over southern parts of Georgia towards tomorrow evening, maybe sneaking towards Atlanta around midnight tomorrow night. All right, we'll look at the deep south here, and the weather's not going to be perfectly quiet. We don't see widespread severe weather, though, but there will be some pop-ups here as we get into the afternoon. Some of them could be pretty intense over southern parts of Mississippi, maybe as far north as Meridian here around 6, 7 o'clock. And then we see a few isolated cells, which I don't think will be severe, over east central Mississippi to about Birmingham here around midnight or so. This is all along our front that's draped across the region and pushing southward. As we get into Wednesday, we will see that front return northward. Moisture is going to build back up and some wet weather across eastern parts of Arkansas into the Delta region, and then spreading southeast towards Montgomery, Dothan, and about Bainbridge, Georgia here later tomorrow. There could be some isolated severe weather and heavy rain out of any of these storms, but nothing organized, no fast-moving complexes at this point. Looking farther south and west towards Louisiana, we are in for more unsettled weather here in the coming days. We'll see pop-ups around the New Orleans area and Gulfport later this morning, and then much of South Louisiana, south of I-10. This afternoon is going to see building storms that move slowly off to the north and east. Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Alexandria, Natchez, all under the gun for locally heavy storms here this afternoon into the evening. Things settle down overnight. We have some leftover scattered showers, and then more storms firing up with the heating of the day tomorrow afternoon, especially over southwestern and west central parts of Louisiana. Now let's swing over to South Texas, and it's going to be a very active stretch of weather. The shorter term isn't going to be as bad as the longer term, but we are definitely going to see our share of rain here over the next couple of days. Storms firing up over southeast Texas, then more storms around Corpus Christi and Beeville this afternoon. They're not fast moving. Some could be intense. Just a lot of rain here, and then quieter overnight tonight with more daytime storms. And notice how early in the day they get going, 9, 10 in the morning here, maybe even sooner than that, and then spreading northeastward with time. And you can see the Houston area is going to be up for a locally heavy rain event. This, it's the HRRR, but if you see this kind of convergence at the Gulf and everything coming out of the south, I do think, now the models don't show it, but I do think there is a threat for what could be called a core rain event tomorrow. That is an area of a band of rain that does not move and produces widespread rain events. These are common in the Houston area due to the convergence and shape of the coastline and how moisture builds up from the Western Gulf up and over into Texas. The western side of Houston, I would not be shocked to see a high-risk flood event happen here tomorrow. Again, the model doesn't explicitly show that, but this is something I've seen happen many times. We saw it during, Hurricane Harvey, Tropical Storm Allison, Tropical Depression Imelda here a few years back. It's because of the shape of the coast in the Houston area, but somebody in here is going to see a big rain event, and I think it's probably going to be tomorrow based on what the HRRR is showing me, because we're seeing weather gathering here early in the day and then just continuing throughout the day. So I-10 tomorrow is going to be a real mess in the Houston area anytime during the day, really, but even into the evening. And then finally, some mercy being shown as this moves off into Louisiana later tomorrow night. So a broad scale look at the GFS model here shows that we are in for a pretty active pattern over the plains, some snow in the Colorado and Wyoming mountains, and then things will move back into the eastern U.S. just in time for the weekend here. And especially on Sunday, we have low pressure moving through New England into early next week. Then it cools off and dries out. Another front moves through, and the eastern U.S. remains unsettled. Whoops, sorry about that. All right, so looking at Kansas, because I think Oklahoma is not going to be super busy here, but Kansas is. We do see this threat for severe weather with storms moving through northeastern Kansas later today, hitting Manhattan, Topeka, Olathe, Leavenworth here later this afternoon into the evening. Then these storms head towards Pittsburgh and weaken. Western Missouri will see storms overnight, but nothing severe at this point, at least widespread. Another storm complex moves through some of the same areas overnight into early tomorrow, and then we dry out and quiet down for a bit with action building in western Kansas. And looking at Nebraska, we are also going to see some rough weather here. Rain and storms later today, some severe weather over south central Nebraska this afternoon, moving southeast. More storms firing up with the heating of the day into this evening, and then moving southeast with the threat for some hail and damaging wind. And then we'll quiet down tomorrow morning before we see action over the western part of Nebraska in the afternoon, continuing into tomorrow night. Finally, the Ohio Valley is going to see quieter weather than the last several days. Some great news for some of you here in Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia. We need to dry out. We will see some scattered action over parts of Missouri, but nothing severe at this point. Tomorrow is going to be a lot quieter as everything pushes off to your south and east. I hope you get to enjoy it. Temperatures are going to stay hot in the southeast today. Low 90s, return to Georgia, South Carolina, maybe parts of North Carolina. Staying pretty warm over western high plains and cool across the northwest, but that's going to change here over the next couple of days as we start warming up in the western U.S. And really not a bad day at all across the mid-Atlantic and northeast tomorrow. Temperatures are going to be very comfortable. As we get on into Thursday, we will start to warm back up into the 70s and low 80s over parts of the northeast away from the coastline, and a seasonably warm day across much of the rest of the east. But look how warm it is across Minnesota and Wisconsin. We see some 80s poking back up, and the western U.S. heats up as we get to the end of the week. 80s and 90s across the western states, hundreds across parts of southeastern California, and warm as well across the Midwest and the Northeast. We'll be enjoying some nice weather on Friday, temperature-wise. Saturday, not bad at all either, but it does start cooling back down across the North Country. 68 in Burlington, 70 in Bangor. Will be pretty toasty across the Southeast on Saturday, but Texas will be rain-cooled, 60s in Lubbock and Amarillo. But look how hot it is in the West. 90 in Portland, upper 80s in Seattle on Saturday. And we may sneak up close to 90 in Seattle, Vancouver, Portland, and Eugene on Sunday. If you're watching from the West and you don't have air conditioning this weekend, just plan on finding a place to stay cooler, as it will be a pretty toasty pattern. It heats up in the southeast as well. 95 in Columbia. I think Mitch West calls it the armpit. I know why. 94 in Macon, 93 in Montgomery. So it's going to be hot in the southeast later this weekend, but rain cooled across portions of Texas. Thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate it. If you could subscribe to my YouTube channel, I very much appreciate that. Get the word out. I'm working on growing my channel and the reach because a lot of folks really do want a more technical discussion and breakdown of the weather. I think there's a lot of good weather channels out there on YouTube. There's a lot of wild weather channels out there, but I really just want to provide you guys with the best that I can. I am a degreed meteorologist, and I believe personally that God has called me to do this, to share my faith with you as well as a Christian man, and to create in me a clean heart, to give me clarity, to give me the ability to share every day. Psalm 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, renew a right spirit within me. And that is sharing the love, sharing the good news with everybody, and showing my love for others by preparing you guys for rough weather. But you also read in Matthew 12, if those of you who are believers, that basically anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but anyone who speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in his age or in his age to come. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. But I tell you that everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. So in Psalm 51, create in me a clean heart, O Lord, O God, by reading the good news every day, by studying the Word of God, the inerrant Word of God, you are given the Spirit to have a clean heart, because later on, if you do not have a clean heart, you will be convicted of that. That is what is said in Matthew 12:36 and 37. And I struggle with this every day. Just to be frank with you guys, dirty language. I struggle with that. Every now and then slipping and saying something that I wish I could regret. I think we're all kind of guilty of that, but I want to come clean and just say I'm very much guilty of that. So going back to the Word, going back and seeing that God has promised us through His Son, Jesus Christ, eternal life, we're still going to come to that day of judgment, and we need to do our very best to be convicted of good words that come from our clean hearts. And that's just what I wanted to share with you today. I'm not here, teaching. I'm not really here to teach. I'm just here to share the good news with you and to know why I do it. And that is going back to this passage in the Bible saying that I need to clean things up so that I can share with you guys the love of God that has been given to me. And that's why I do what I do every day. So I thank you all for your time today. Happy to pray for you. I pray for a lot of folks that are subscribers to this channel that come back on a regular basis. And I wanted you guys to know that. If you could pray for me as well, I very much appreciate that. And I know it helps everyone as well. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a blessed day. And if you're in Texas, please be safe with the flooding that is expected here the next several days. God bless you.